Finance Committee meeting, and can we take roll call?
Yes, we'll start with Committee Member Harmon,
Here.
Vice Chair Friedman,
Here.
Chair Gutierrez.
Here. Do we have any public comment?
Chair Gutierrez, no hands are raised.
We can move on to the first agenda item.
Okay, good afternoon, Chair Gutierrez, Vice Chair Freeman, and Member Harmon. My name is Gabrielle Cook, and I am the Water Resources Financial Officer. And today we are going to go over the proposed utility rates, which include water, wastewater, and solid waste. Back in February, we had a pretty extensive conversation about the water and wastewater rates, but today is going to be the first time that you're hearing about the solid waste rates. I am joined today, am I really loud? Okay. I am joined today by Mr. Korn at HDR and Dustin Murback from Sustainability and Resilience. Mr. Korn is going to talk about our water and wastewater proposed rates, and Mr. Murback is going to talk about our solid waste rates. And this is an overview of the presentation. So we're going to start with wastewater and water with those proposed rates and our recommendations. And then we'll move on to Mr. Murback with the solid waste proposed rates and recommendations. Then we'll go to the customer notification and outreach, including the Prop 218 notices. And then we'll finish up with the next steps and the schedule. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Korn.
Good afternoon. As you may recall, back in February, we walked through the different rate alternatives for water and wastewater, and we had some really good conversation with the Finance Committee and then the City Council as a whole to talk through that process. During those two discussions, we came back with a couple different assumptions and analyses, so today we're presenting you with the final proposed water and wastewater rates. As we go into our rate study, we have our goals and objectives. The first is obviously to develop a set of proposed rates to generate sufficient revenue to maintain and operate the water and wastewater utilities while meeting the requirements of Proposition 218 by developing cost-based and proportional rates. As we do that, we also take into account our debt service coverage, our prudent funding of capital on a pay-as-you-go basis, and meeting council policy reserves. That's going to be the focus of our discussion today of how we've transitioned that over this rate setting period and subsequent years to meet our overall rate projections. We do this developed based on industry standard approaches, but tailored to each system's unique customer and characteristics and system use. So on the next slide, it'll kick off our overall approach to doing this. Remember, it's a three-step process: a revenue requirement, it's the financial plan, compares our revenues to expenses, including our operating and capital. Our cost of service is developed to meet the requirements of Proposition 218 and the proportionality, and the reason why we have different rates by class, and then we design rates based on the results of those two analyses. So to kick it off here on water and wastewater, as I mentioned, the starting point of this is thinking about the comments and discussions we had during the Finance Committee and the City Council. Last time we presented you with a whole bunch of tables and charts. This time we boiled it down to 3 slides for the revenue requirement. And really the discussion was, can we make any further reductions to the proposed rate adjustments by reducing or minimizing our overall reserve levels over the time period. And so for both utilities, we have specific policies in place to meet those based on prior council policies to establish those. And so what you'll see here on this slide is the wastewater reserve funds. And our light green, or through fiscal year 28, is our rate setting period, the next 4 years. The darker green, fiscal year 29 and 30, are the subsequent 2 years. Previously, when we developed the rate analyses in fiscal year 28, the green bar touched the dashed line. That's our target. We have now extended that out to minimize rate adjustments through 2030. So with proposed adjustments in 29 and 30, we would hit council policy in that year. So we would have 2 years where we're below actual council policy, but with a plan to go back and meet those council policy reserve levels on wastewater at that time. Same or similar discussion here on the water side. Now, water's a little bit different. Wastewater, we were able to maintain reserves a little bit longer. With the capital plan on water, we have some larger capital projects that we're funding. So you can see that dashed line going out across the page. And in this case, we almost meet it by 2028. So in the prior version of the rate adjustments, we did meet that in 2028. So we were able to minimize the rate impacts a bit, that I'll show you here in a moment, to meet this. So in 2029, we meet our target policy. Overall, one of the other questions we had was, does this have an impact on our bond rating? And this may, or it could. It really is going to depend at the time of when if you were to go out and issue debt on the financial markets. Having said that, we have a plan to get back to council policy levels. So we're going to meet our overall goals over the time frame. The city council has historically implemented rate adjustments to meet your overall targets, and so that would also have some weight as part of that going forward. So a concern, but not a major concern. So where did we start? The top block, looking at the wastewater, initially in January, we were at 14s and 12s. And then staff working, public works staff, utility staff, finance went through with a fine-tooth comb to see what those projections look like. We're able to bring it down to what we presented in February, the 10.5, 10, 10, 9.5. And then the refined analysis, you'll see the March 2024, that's when we presented that to Water Commission, which was then recommended to be in front of you all today. We brought it down to 9.5%. So by pushing out our reserve policy till 2030, we were able to minimize another 1% or 0.5% on our rates in the initial year for wastewater. On the water side, we were able to drop it down by 1.5% in each of the first 2 years, and then 1%, and then we had to push it up 1% in the out 2 years from 9 to 10. Otherwise, we lose that compounding or that overall revenue generation that we're able to meet our targets by 2029 and 2030 fiscal years. So overall, a slight reduction in the overall rate transition plan and impact to customer bills. So once we know that, then we can move into our cost of service. We have our total cost that we need to recover. Basically, the cost of service looks at how we incur costs and who benefits from that cost. On the water side, we're really looking at our average day and our cost of water supply. It's that resource stacking, groundwater, surface water, desal as part of that, or customer related. On wastewater, it's how much wastewater flows to El Estero plant for treatment, and then the strength of that wastewater and the customer related. So we go through that process and look at why we've incurred those costs based on those parameters. For each customer class, it's proportionally distributed based on their proportion of those costs. So if we have 10 customers and residential are 5 of those 10 customers, they're allocated 50% of that customer cost. That's that proportionality component. On the wastewater side, the results reflect past studies and results. There were minimal cost differences. There's one class, the commercial class, that I'll talk about in the rate design, that was a little outside our norm. On the water side, there are differences. It's driven by our cost of water supply. So what our overall supply sources are costing us over time. One comment here, one question that we've heard as we've gone through this process is the impact of our overall supply costs. Why when it rains do the costs not come down? Again, our costs of supply are set. The rain just gives us how much water's in those reservoirs at Gibraltar as an example, or Kachuma, and how much water's going to flow to us. But our overall costs of maintaining those facilities to provide that service maintain essentially the same over time. As we look at this, we developed cost of service results for the proposed fiscal year 2025. And as we go to our wastewater side, what you'll see here, the black bar or the bar on the left is our current revenue at today's rates. The blue bar or the bar on the right is our distributed costs. So of our total costs, today residential is allocated $23.3 million. Their current revenue is $21.5 million. So we need to increase rates to reflect that cost of service result. What you'll see is, for the most part, the proportionality is similar. The exception is the commercial class in the middle. And part of that is just changes in customer characteristics. Same amount of volume, a little higher strength, a little higher costs that are impacting some of those customers. And it's really the larger water users in that class that will have a higher impact. Those that only pay the minimum bill would not see as significant of an impact. On the water side, very similar discussion. The blue bar is our current revenue. The red bars are our distributed costs. So again, looking at the residential column, 42.4 million of current revenues, distributed costs of 46.2 million. So in our rate design, our target is to recover the 46.273 million. And that's that increase to those customer rates. You can see that for the different customers. As you also notice, residential, which is both our single family and our multifamily, those are the vast majority of our customers and our revenues. Recycled water is a set aside calculation. It's based on those specific costs for those recycled water customers only as part of that. So once we know the cost of service, then we can develop our proposed rates. So we'll walk through our overall proposed rates as part of this. These are the maximum proposed rates that are developed based on our rate study and specifically the revenue requirement and cost of service. Year one, it's based on the unit cost and the cost of service. That establishes our rate. Years 2, 3, and 4 is based on those percentages that we saw in the revenue requirement. And each component is equally adjusted. So that's why year one of a cost of service is always our reset year where we establish this and then we adjust by a percentage of basis. No rate structure or how we charge the customer changes are recommended. For wastewater, we have our single family, multifamily, commercial high, and strength surcharge for those that have higher strength waste. On water, we have single family, multi-commercial, and then the various irrigation accounts. On the wastewater side, for single family, it's a flat fixed charge and a variable charge up to a cap of 8 HCF. HCF is 100 cubic feet. Each cubic foot, 100 cubic feet is 748 gallons. And so you see that base fee today is $27, and then that increases over the 4-year period. And then our volume charge for the first 8 increases over time from the current $4.28. All use over the 8 is presumed to be outdoor use, so it's not impacting the wastewater system, so it's excluded from the calculation. Multifamily is charged the same, a base fee, same base fee and same volume charge as single family. However, there's no cap on the amount of water use that is billed through the sewer rates. Now, having said that, when you look at the average use for a single family home, it's in that 8 HCF range. For multifamily on a per living unit basis, so if you think of a multifamily complex with 5, 10, 20 units, the average use is only around 4 to 5 HCF, so much lower usage. Part of that is many of these multifamily complexes have separate irrigation meters for the water side, so the wastewater bill is not impacted by that outdoor use. On the commercial side, there is a minimum charge, so it is the greater of the minimum, the greater of the volume charge times their total usage or the minimum bill. So that volume charge you see at the bottom here is $5.27 today per HCF, and how that increases over this time frame. If that is greater than the minimum bill by meter size, then those customers will pay that higher charge or the minimum. This is the class that I noted earlier, has a slightly larger impact than other customer classes based on the cost of service in year one. So those larger water users where that volume charge goes from $5.27 to $6.56, they will see a larger impact than those customers that stay below their minimum bill over time. Commercial high strength is also a minimum bill or the larger volume charge, a different rate. This is based on the higher strength. The higher strength of the wastewater results in more cost to treat that wastewater, but again, maintain the current rate structure and simply increase that based on the cost of service. The high strength surcharge only applies to some of your larger industrial type customers. Marburg is an example, the breweries, things of those natures where they discharge higher strength waste. And so they're charged on a per pound basis for BOD, biochemical oxygen demand, or TSS, total suspended solids, or ammonia. So you can see these rates have been updated again from a cost of service perspective. The BOD rate goes down a bit in year one, but TSS and ammonia go up. Just as a point of reference, your High-strength customers for the surcharge have actually reduced since the last rate study. So it's gotten better, less higher strength waste coming to the plant. Moving to water, this is the monthly fixed service charges by meter size. As we mentioned, this increases for the larger meter sizes based on the meter equivalency factors or the capacity impacts that these customers may have on the system. And you can see how that adjusts. Year 1 reflects the cost of service, and then years 2, 3, and 4 increase based on the percentage adjustments. The consumption charge or the volumetric rate for single family, we have 3 tiers, 0 to 4, 4 to 16, and over 16 HCF. And again, you can see here present rates versus proposed rates for fiscal year 25. The second column, that change in those consumption or volumetric rates. Again, year 1 of fiscal year 25 increased by the cost of service and then a percentage adjustment in the out years. Multifamily has the same tiers but per dwelling unit. So if there's 2 dwelling units, it's 2 times the 4 HCF for the first tier. Recycled water has a separate and distinct rate, as I mentioned, based on the cost of providing recycled water. And then your commercial and industrial customers, there's an allotment per month for those customers based on their specific usage. The up to allotment and then over allotment. And again, all of these rates that you see here are based on the cost of water supply. So when we talked about the prioritization of supply cost, it's based on our groundwater being our lowest cost all the way up to our desal water, which is the highest cost, and how that is able to be spread among the different customers and tiers based on how much water is in each of those. And then finally, our irrigation. We have irrigation ag, irrigation rec, and irrigation urban. They have a budget, so a specific amount for their irrigable area. And you see the rate for the first up to budget and then the over budget, which is the same as our upper tiers for our other customer classes as part of this as well. So what does this all mean? Overall, the impact, stealing some of Dustin's thunder here a little bit, but on the combined bill, when we look at the sum of the water, wastewater, and solid waste, and the UUT, then that's an overall impact of $11.66 in the first year, fiscal year 25, or a 4.8% overall increase in the customer's bill. And then how does this look for the South Coast comparison? So what do we look like in our area? And on the left-hand side, we have our single family at 8 HCF. And you can see that's compared to Goleta for wastewater, Goleta sand, Montecito sand, Carpinteria sand, and Summerlin sand, right in the mix there for our typical single family bill. And actually our capped bill, that's the highest bill for our single family customers. And then on the right side, again, you can see the water rates for, again, for Goleta, Montecito, Carpinteria, very similar. Remember, this is not necessarily an apples to apples comparison, just given some of these utilities are going through rate studies. Montecito Water, as an example, is starting to go down that path to look at that. That's why you see the little shading in there as part of that. And others have future years adjustments as well. And then finally, our multifamily or apartment condo impact. This is for our individually metered customers, so it's a single unit. Master metered, where you have multiple units, have a different rate because it's all combined together. But for those individual, you can see it's a $9.38 increase compared to the $11.66 for single family. That's because their average use is about half. It is a higher proportion or percentage impact simply because they are not charged the solid waste rate as part of that. So the overall bill is less to begin with as part of that. And with that, I will turn it over to solid waste.
Thank you very much. Chair Gutierrez, Councilmember Friedman, thank you for the opportunity to present the solid waste rate increases for fiscal year 2025. So these are the elements that we're going to be going over today. These are going to be what are building into this annual rate increase, and what you're going to see is ultimately a total bill impact for the typical residential customer of 1.3% and an overall solid waste rate revenue requirement increase of 1.9%. We're going to talk about the factors affecting revenue service stability, as well as what builds those revenue requirement components, and then I will show you what those look like for some representative customer classes. So our solid waste rate fund is approximately $40 million, and an enormous portion of that is associated with our long-term contracts. That's mostly going to be driven by our material delivery agreement with the county, which funds our participation in the Resource Recovery Center and anaerobic digester up at Tehiquis that enables us to divert a substantial amount of our municipal solid waste that otherwise would be unsorted and going to directly to the landfill. We also have to consider our solid waste fund policy reserves. The other large component of our revenue requirements is our franchise agreement with Marburg. This year, the franchise agreement went into effect on June 8th, and this year, per the terms of that contract, we are keeping the overall hauler compensation flat, which means that is not an additional cost increase in the rates this year. Beyond that, there is that 22-year material delivery agreement with the county, and so the costs for that this year are going up close to the contractual maximum. They can go up 7.5% in a single year, or up to 15% over the course of 3 years. This year it is approximately 7.4% increase. That's partially going to be driven by the increased costs associated with the termination of the contract for the operator that was not performing satisfactorily for the county. We also have our reserves policy requirement, needs to be 25%, which is $10 million on that $40 million budget. We are on good track to keep that up, which is actually going to let us to meet our reserve requirement, which is going to let us actually reduce our program costs somewhat this year. So putting that all together, we have our hauler compensation is remaining flat. Our processing and disposal with the county is going up. 2.8% is the impact of that 7.4% once it's applied to the totality of our revenue requirements. And then with some reductions to program cost requirements, as well as because we will be meeting our reserve requirements from the previous year, we're able to reduce the rate impact by 0.9%, resulting in a total charge change in customer charges of 1.9%. What we have here are some examples for typical customers within different customer sectors. This first column this first row is going to show a typical small residential customer. That's going to be someone with 1 to 4 units, is going to be small residential. This represents your typical single-family residence that has 65 gallons of trash, 65 gallons of green waste, and 65 gallons of recycling being serviced once per week. And these prices are for a monthly service at that level. And as you can see, it's going up 1.3% for those small residential customers, slightly higher for our 5+ unit large residential customers at 1.39%. Relatively moderate increases there. Next slide, please. Furthermore, we have our large residential customers that have service in dumpsters, and they are seeing a 1.39% as well. Followed by our business customers that are seeing a slightly larger 2.18% increase, depending on whether, which is regardless of whether they're in carts and cans or dumpsters, but it's still a moderate increase to their bill over time. What we see here is the comparison of the upcoming fiscal year 2025 rates for that typical single-family monthly bill for the city of Santa Barbara compared to the fiscal year 2024 rates for neighboring jurisdictions and service areas. The other jurisdictions do not have their rates published yet, so we're looking at the upcoming year compared to the other jurisdictions prior year. And as you can see, we are higher than the city of Goleta and the Goleta north of Hollister service area, but we are about in line with the Goleta south of Hollister and below what the Hope Ranch costs are, and we are expecting to see those other bars increase pretty substantially, particularly for the city of Goleta. So we're reasonably within the same cost of service overall for our region. To reiterate, what we're seeing here is when you put all of the water, wastewater, and solid waste rates together, you can see this increase for a typical family customer, typical single-family customer, from about $241 a month to about $253, or a 4.8% 50% increase. Putting all of that together, part of our process for noticing this in order to approve these rates, in order for council to approve these rates, is our Proposition 218 notification process. This requires Finance Committee, or what we're doing today will be asking for this to go forward to council, needs to approve a rate hearing for all of these rates. And then we will send out a mailing. We will give a 45-day period for the customers who receive these. These will go out to every single account holder. And if 50% plus one of those account holders file an official protest, then the rates cannot move forward. This is a California state legal requirement that we are fulfilling with this. What we have here is an example of the solid waste rate. There's a draft of that letter that we're intending on sending out with council's approval that summarizes the content of the solid waste portion of what we had discussed. And with that, I'll hand it over back to Water. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murback. So here we have, similar to the solid waste Prop 218 notice, this is the draft for the wastewater Prop 218 notice. And as was discussed prior, it is legally required, and it shows the timing of the rates as well as the proposed public hearing, date, time, and location. And as was mentioned, these are physically mailed out to all account holders, and we will be emailing them to the account holders that we have emails for as well. And then here is the draft water Prop 218 notice, very similar, actually identical except for the rates. And along with those Prop 218 notices for water and wastewater, we're going to be sending an outreach information flyer. And so this has more information on the rate increases and why they are needed. And both the Prop 218 notices as well as this outreach information flyer will be available in English and Spanish. We do recognize that the water and the wastewater rate increases, the proposed rate increases, are higher than we've typically seen in the past. So we want to make sure that we are doing our part to really engage the community and have our outreach to the community and help them understand the need for these increases to help fund our infrastructure. We send out monthly utility bill inserts that have articles about what we do and why we need the rate increases. We also have information in the city news and brief as well as the quarterly water resources newsletter. There is a new platform. We have the Water Smart Customer Portal, so we're really excited about that. We just rolled it out a couple of months ago, and this is where customers can see their water usage and pay their bills online. And there's an announcement section in there, so we'll be utilizing that as well. The Prop 218 notices, as mentioned before, are legally required. We will also be sending out the Water Resources Annual Report, and that will have a couple of articles highlighting the need for the rate increases. And those will be mailed to every mailbox here in Santa Barbara, and those will be mailed in May. In addition, we do have a website that will be specific to the current rate changes. On that website, we will have our facts, our frequently asked questions, links to relevant Water Commission and council meetings, and customer resources. And then we will be holding a public informational webinar on May 22nd at 6 p.m. And that will be recorded and it will be posted on our website. And a Spanish version will be posted after the live event. So we have come before a couple of public meetings for water and wastewater. If approved today here at Finance Committee and Council, we will send out that rate notice on April 24th. We'll have that public information webinar specific for the water and wastewater proposed rates on May 22nd. And then we'll have that rate hearing on June 25th at Council. And if everything goes well, then we will have adoption on July 2nd. We are asking for a couple of recommendations today. So the first is to receive a presentation on these proposed water and wastewater rates. And then we're asking that Finance Committee recommend that Council set the public hearing date for June 25th, and then also recommend that Council direct staff to send that public notice, that notice of public hearing to customers, informing them of the date. And with that, we're happy to answer questions.
Any questions?
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. I have just a couple of questions. If you could pull up slide 7. So on the reserves, I had a question. So in order to minimize or address the water impacts now, we'll dip into the reserves as part of our rate setting. And then on the back end, it looks like in fiscal year 29 or 30, the reserves will get replenished. Is that because of the way the rate structure is, or do we have to have a higher rate at that time to make up the reserves? And where I'm going with this is, there was another slide. It's back in 2016. The council had made a decision before any of us were on council to dip into reserves on the solid waste rates for a couple years. Because the county was expanding to the new resource recovery facility. And so that was a large jump. But they took it out of reserves to lessen the impact. And then what happened was a couple of years down the line, they had to repay those reserves by adding another 1 or 2%. But that was at the same time that there was a 10% increase or so, or 12%. So the impact down the line was a 14% increase in that 1 year. So I'm just wondering if these rates are going to catch us up without having to do that, or are we just simply saying we're going to reduce the increase now and then add it on later?
Yeah, a great question on that. And so what this assumes, based on the assumptions and projections in the analysis, is that in fiscal year 29 and 30, we're back to our, I'll say, quote, typical rate adjustments, which were somewhere between 5 and 7% each year. And that applies to both water and wastewater. So we're not having to increase 29 and 30 substantially more, as you explained, to get back. This is our kind of our normal overall rate adjustments that we're looking at.
Okay, so this is different than what took place about 7 years ago, where it's built in to be stable, whereas they were just deferring it at the time, knowing they would have to do a larger rate increase later on.
Correct. That's why you did see on the water, if you go 2 more slides, on the water here, we went from 12, 12, 9, 9, we went to 10.5, 10.5, 10, 10. That's more addressing, I think, the comment that you just brought up. That's why we're doing the 9 to 10, is to keep it where we need to be.
Okay, that makes sense, and I think that's better than having to do a larger rate increase at once later on.
Yes.
And then it's my last question. I guess if you could pull up slide 13, and so it gets into the fixed charge for water, and there's a discussion that I know it's taken place at Water Commission, even at Council a little bit, but with the water, it's about 30% is the fixed charge and 70% is the volumetric, and there's reasons for that so that customers can have more control over their water bill by reducing. But at the same time, it creates more volatility. So is there been discussions about potentially if you could actually pull up slide 21. So let's take the top line. Is there been discussions about increasing the percentage of the fixed charge to, one, reduce the volatility, but then you would continue to get those revenues? So when, say, the use goes down, we get into another drought, there's that buffer so that we're not running into revenue challenges, which then would affect our assumptions on all this. And then I see that if I'm reading that chart right, say the 5/8, that 3260 is the fixed charge?
Correct.
And then so it goes up to 48.41. Is that still at the 30% rate, or is that raising it to 30 to 35 or whatever it is?
Okay, I'll answer the last first because it's the easiest. Yes, it maintains that roughly 30-70 split out through the 4 years for the water utility. And to the first part of your question, yes, we did talk about that during this rate study of should we look at what other costs are more fixed in nature that we can recover through that fixed charge. Part of that discussion is also going back and looking at our current consumption levels. So how much water folks are using right now, both our residential, commercial, and irrigation customers. And we are at a lower period right now. It's kind of stayed at a lower consumption level. So for this study, we came back and maintained that 30-70 split is where it came out again. But with Water Commission and internally staff and myself, we did have some really long discussions about how do we look at that? And that's something I think we've talked about should be further discussed or adjusted and reviewed during the next rate study as we kind of get another handle on where consumption levels are going to be.
So if there was a change of, say, for rate stability to reduce the volatility, but that would be 4 years from now. We wouldn't change it in the middle of this, say in 2 years, you have a new council or something like that. You'd wait until the next study down the line, getting towards the end of the decade, to have that discussion.
Correct, and part of that is these rates are the maximum rates that, if adopted by the council, these would be the maximum rates that can be implemented. So you couldn't change that higher without going through another Prop 218 process.
Okay.
So that's the primary reason why it would wait till the next study.
Okay, thank you.
Public comment? No
I
questions.
actually have some questions, Chairwoman Gutierrez.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much. Sorry if I missed it or didn't understand this, but at what point are we going to see the analysis of reducing the reserve requirement for both water and or wastewater?
Committee Member Harmon, this is Keith DeMartini, Finance Director, and so we are waiting for direction from council to direct staff to potentially revisit the terms in the reserve policy. At this time, the reserve policy stands at a 10% contingency reserve, disaster reserve, and a 15% contingency reserve.
So didn't we give direction at the last hearing on this that we'd like to see an analysis of the impacts both to the reserves and to the rates that would be charged if we were to lower those requirements?
So we tried to address that by pushing out meeting the reserve requirement. So we had it meet at fiscal year 28, and we pushed that out, effectively reducing the reserve requirement, but without reducing the reserve requirement.
So, yeah, I appreciate that. I would like to see the analysis of the reduction of the reserve requirement. So, thank you. I won't be supporting this today for that reason. Thank you.
Public comment?
Chair Gutierrez, no hands are raised.
And do we have any comments?
So I'll just make a comment. Raising rates is never ideal, but we do have a responsibility, especially with capital investment, to do that as we go and make sure that we're raising the rates appropriately so we can make the proper investments and keeping our infrastructure up to date and not dilapidated where it costs more to fix it on an emergency basis. And there are significant capital costs that are taking place. We are subject to international pressures on the market in terms of the materials, and also with labor and everything increasing. We have those same pressures as the private sector and everywhere else. And so that's why these costs have gone up, as I understand it. I would say in terms of the outreach, one thing I think that would help is when we're talking about the water and the wastewater, those are effectively 10% per year. That is significant and challenging for many members of the public. However, when we factor that in, and slide 34 showed that with the solid waste rates, because those are only 1.9%, it turns it into about 5%, 4.8. And I think we have a good story to tell about the solid waste, how when we made those investments at the time, we are seeing the dividends of that now, because if we hadn't made that at the time, the rates would be significantly higher now. We would have to have had a larger increase in the solid waste rates. And so I think as part of that outreach is explaining how by doing it properly at the time, you can see that with the solid waste so that the public understands why we're doing it and the benefit they get. And then in addition to all the other outreach that you're going to do into why the water and wastewater are significant, because we're facing the same challenges with those as we faced 5, 6, 7 years ago with solid waste. So to the extent that you can incorporate the solid waste story in that and why it is 1.9%, because we made these hard choices, I think would help the public understand it. So just wanted to add that. And so with that, I'll make a motion for staff recommendations A, B, and C.
Do we have a second?
Councilmember Harmon has her hand
Yes,
raised.
I'm sorry. Councilmember Harmon?
No, thank you so much. I know it's annoying to deal with virtual. I'm just going to reiterate, I really appreciate all the work that has gone into this, and I in no way would like to indicate that it's not incredibly well thought out, that these costs are not rising. All of the things that Councilmember Friedman said are absolutely true. And our staff, I know you have done an excellent job and have been incredibly thoughtful in the way that you've moved through this process. So that is a baseline for me that I wanted to be very clear that I articulated. But, look, the truth is, it was very important to me to see that analysis. And I understand we've moved the date out, but that's just different than what we voted on and what I asked for. And so for me, I'm not in a position to be able to support this. That analysis was critical to my ability to be able to really go out to my neighbors and articulate with sort of a full heart and mind that this is necessary and that we explored every single option. So with regret, unfortunately for me, both today here at Finance and later when it comes to Council, because of the absence of that analysis, which I was really, really looking for, I won't be supporting this moving forward. Sorry.
Thank you, Councilmember Harmon. So do we?
Oh, thank you. So we did reduce the requirement, the rate from a 10.5 to a 9.5 for wastewater. So that was the effective impact of pushing out that reserve requirement. So we were able to reduce it a little bit because of that. And so for wastewater.
I understand, but my interest is not in pushing out the reserve requirement. My interest is in lowering the reserve requirement and understanding the impacts over time. So I appreciate that there's that immediate effect, and I hear you. But that doesn't get at what I'm actually trying to explore, if that makes sense.
Oh, understood. Thank you.
I'm going to second the motion to move staff recommendation to have further discussion at council. Can we get a vote, please?
So the motion was made by Vice Chair Freeman. It was seconded by Chair Gutierrez. We'll start with Committee Member Harmon.
Respectfully, no.
Vice Chair Freeman.
Yes.
Chair Gutierrez.
Yes.
The motion passes 2-1.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.